So on a whim, while browsing through the Steam storefront, for whatever reason, I had an impulse to look up any Tetris games on Steam. At the moment, the big related game, as of this recording, is Puyo Puyo Tetris from Sega, which is not bad. Not bad at all, but I was curious to see if there were something out there besides a crossover. So after a bit of a brief search, and I do mean brief, I came across this game, Tetropunk, a 2017 release from the crazy developer and some Russian name I can't pronounce. It was cheap, I was sold, and so how was the game? Well, that's the rest of this video, I suppose. Anyways, let's check it out. The simplest and perhaps the most straightforward way to properly describe Tetropunk is it's basically steampunk Tetris. And that's it. It's just steampunk Tetris. Well, let's not call it steampunk Tetris because then people will get sued and shit. And quite honestly, I don't know how people haven't already been sued and shit, but there you go. So, Tetropunk is basically a bootleg Tetris. Nothing particularly special about it, other than the fact that it's modeled after a more old-school flavor of Tetris rather than the modern style that has been largely prevalent for the past couple decades or so. There's no piece holding, there's no ghost preview, no infinite spin, you could only preview the next piece or not the next 3 or 4, tetrominoes lock into place the instant they touch down, and control is a lot more restrictive with only one rotation key. So this is based on very old-school Tetris, the kind of Tetris you get from games on the Famicom or the various home computer formats of the 1980s. However, you still have slow drops, much like in the old Tetris games on NES or Game Boy, and not the fast drops of those really old Tetris games. Tetropunk only has 2 modes of play, an arcade mode which is basically an endless marathon mode that only goes up to level 10, and a 60-second time attack sort of game where you attempt to score the highest score possible within 60 plus seconds. In any event, Tetropunk plays much like any Tetris game or derivative would. Blocks would fall from the top and you have to clear them from the well by forming complete lines. Every few lines cleared move you up a level and does so continually until you hit level 10, at which point it's all about trying to survive and achieve as high a score as possible. Level 10, I will admit, is not super fast like proper Tetris games these days would be. You'll never gain that Grandmaster speed or anything like that here. So expert players might not get much out of this because it'll be too slow for them, I would imagine. Also, there's no level select options to start at higher levels, which is a bit of an unfortunate omission, but on the flip side, the game ends when you top out and not when you hit a certain number of lines like most Tetris games these days would. There's not much to the game. Control is done entirely with either the arrow keys or the WASD keys, with absolutely no controller support whatsoever. Now that last point might seem like a bit of a turnoff because most people these days, I imagine, would prefer playing a Tetris type game with a D-pad rather than the keyboard, but I'll tell you something. The arrow keys are sufficient, they work, contrary to what a couple reviews on Steam would tell you, but playing Tetropunk one hand with WASD felt so natural and so comfortable that I didn't miss a controller playing this. Given what few things you can do, which is rotate one way, soft drop, and move left or right, keeping it all within finger reach is perhaps the best thing one could do when making a computer Tetris game. Honestly, I've played computer Tetris games in the past where the inputs were situated all over the keyboard, and if you're not doing the full set of controls, whatever that might entail, this compact setup works nicely. And again, the arrow keys work as well, so the game complements both hands if you prefer. And while we're on the subject of both hands, the other genius, or some would argue insane idea that Tetropunk does is every once in a while you'll have this little smiley face pop up telling you to touch it. You basically do this by using the mouse cursor to click on that smiley face for either bonus points or to add a few seconds in a time attack mode, thus making this the only Tetris bootleg that I've played where you're actively using keyboard and mouse. You don't have to play with the mouse if you don't want to, they're just points in arcade, and really, the time boosts are so minimal in the other mode that it's probably not worth it, but it does add a bit of an extra dynamic to the game, because surely if the game's speed cap isn't going to challenge you, then maybe killing happiness with a cursor will. Speaking of killing happiness, I'll be right back, I gotta take care of something. You're a terrible dog and nobody likes you. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, back to the, game. Regardless of how the game controls, Tetropunk is straight up old school Tetris without any of the modern additions, and that alone is a big factor as to whether someone would enjoy this or not. For me, I got my fair share of mileage out of this one. It played well enough, the way things moved and fell into place worked as well as expected, and also, I've played more than enough different Tetris games over the course of 20 plus years that I'm used to different flavors of that game, especially from different developers with their own takes and flavors, so I'm okay with a different take as long as it plays well, and Tetropunk plays well enough that, hey, you know what, I have no complaints. This is fine. The only real sticking points here is that the highest level may not be fast enough for some folks' tastes, though I suppose the aim is for a more casual long-term type of play. The lack of options, choosing a starting level, being able to choose music tracks, customizing controls, that sort of thing, might also seem like a bit of a turnoff, but on the flip side, Tetropunk is really flippin' cheap. Only a couple bucks, and its hardware requirements aren't astronomical, so look, I don't know. Game plays fine if not bare bones. I like the visual presentation of Tetropunk, which is essentially, like I said before, steampunk Tetris in terms of the theme and the graphical style. I actually like the little animation of the shifting tiles whenever you rotate a piece, which I'll admit at first it felt like a bit of a distraction, but I got used to it and thought it was pretty neat seeing those tetrominos shift before my very eyes. The smoke that comes out when you clear lines, the sparks that emit when you're grinding against the wall of the well. Couple really nice details that at first, again, might seem a bit off-putting, but again, works within the context of the game. It's a nice, simplistic looking game that doesn't heavily detract you with flashing lights and on-screen prompts. Well, happiness tries to eke in and then you touch it to make it go away, so. In terms of sound, you have a few pieces of electro-remixed, old-timey sounding music playing in the background that play at random as you play. There's a couple tunes in there of decent length, and they're actually pretty decent sounding little tunes. If only there was an option to pick which tune plays throughout instead of having the tunes play at random as you progress in the game, but whatever. The sound effects are appropriate clanking sounds that fit with the overall theme of the game, and they sound alright. Not much else to say in that regard. Overall, if you like Tetris games of an older persuasion, then Tetropunk is one worth checking out. It might lack in options, but it gets the job done where it counts. It's far more mesmerizing than I would have expected, and it's only a couple bucks, so yeah, good stuff, fun times.